Good afternoon, Julia.
Thanks for joining us. First of all, the significance of what Joe Biden had to say in terms of wanting an 8-week ceasefire and saying he believes Netanyahu's making mistakes. Is this a major sort of change in his policy, or is this sort of just where we've been heading for quite some weeks now?
I think, Julia, it's the next ratcheting up in a series of moves that you've seen from this administration in recent weeks, which accelerated after the attack that killed those aid workers a week ago. And you've seen the Israelis in response opening up a couple of new channels into Gaza. They've withdrawn their troops from part of Gaza, and there seems to be some new impetus behind these negotiations on a temporary ceasefire and hostage release, though we've seen positive signals about that before, and it's not happened. So let's not assume that's going to happen. And in calling for a prolonged ceasefire like that, Biden has kind of taken the next step. And if we think about what the Israelis have done since that phone call between Biden and Netanyahu, I think on Sunday, he does seem to have a bit of leverage here. He does seem to be able to be pushing a bit because the Israeli position has changed.
Yeah, a lot more aid going in.
Exactly, yeah.
Although, of course, we have still had Benjamin Netanyahu, a lot of people thinking that Rafah assault's not going to happen. He said, no, there is a date for that. We understand Israel has purchased 40,000 tents, which believes are moving people, civilians, out of Rafah into refugees camps. I mean, one assumes those tents are, multi-man tents rather than just for 40,000 people or so. What do you think the likelihood that there will be that assault on Rafah, given the growing international unease about this and the growing pressure on Israel from key allies like the United States and UK?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I would have said before Netanyahu's latest pronouncements on this that maybe it's not going to happen. But on the basis of what he said now, it would be a huge climb down by him if it didn't happen. So we don't have a date for it yet, although he says he decided when it's going to be. I think international pressure on him will continue to ramp up. Of course, if they did do an exceptional, brilliantly planned effort to evacuate all of the civilians from the area, I suppose it is conceivable that they could do this operation, this offensive, without too much harm, too much civilian.
Yeah. And also, there isn't any point in the IDF forces going into Gaza to rout out Hamas fighters in Gaza City and other towns and cities, and then to leave them, a big bulk of them, the rump of them, sitting there quite happily in their tunnels in Rafah. They need to be ousted from Rafah as well. I mean, I can imagine no other government thinking it would be acceptable to leave this terrorist organisation able to just completely regroup again from Rafah. It seems to me to be utterly unreasonable for the West to expect that not to happen. But it is, of course, reasonable for us to say, and quite rightly, that we need to protect civilian life. And if it takes an awful lot longer and is an awful lot harder to do, then so be it. But the need to protect civilian life should be absolutely paramount.
Look, that's a fair point. That's a fair point, Julia. Although I would say that the often cited objective that Netanyahu has of complete destruction of Hamas, I think ultimately is unattainable because you just can't quite achieve that. If it's true that there are still several Hamas battalions, as he says, in Rafah, and Israel has the right of self-defense, then yes, he has a case for going in. But it will be a very, very big operation to move all of those people out.
Yeah.
And so far, I think the Israelis have been a bit reckless in how they have done this operation. They haven't taken sufficient care to evacuate civilians or to protect civilians, and they haven't allowed enough food supplies and other humanitarian supplies in. If they did all of those things, we might see it differently. But the track record so far isn't good enough. So
except probably better than anything the British Army or the American Army or any other army would be expected to do.
Well, I think the British Army certainly would debate that with you, Julia. But you know,
Really, I think the Israeli army is always held to a higher account. I mean, look, it's interesting also these talks in Cairo appear to be broken down when Hamas. Again, I don't know why people are calling for Israel to have a ceasefire. It's Hamas that needs to have the ceasefire. They're still sending rockets and they're still keeping their civilians as humanitarian shields and still holding those hostages. But it seems that it's broken down over the demand for at least 40 hostages to be released by Israel. It appears that Hamas is saying, reading between the lines, they don't have control of 40 of the hostages. Now, we understand 131 are still unaccounted for. It's thought that at least 30 or so of those believed to have died at some point during the IDF assault on Gaza. But if Hamas don't have control of 40 of those hostages, we know it still includes young women. We know we had horrific tales of rape, sexual abuse, torture, and horrific treatment of these hostages. That is a real concern about what's happened to them, where they are, or if they're even alive.
It is a real concern, and I don't understand how Hamas can possibly claim that they don't have control of 40 of them. After all, they took them, they captured them, they are hiding them somewhere. So I don't.
You don't accept that. Just finally, is there a battle going on at the heart of government, do you believe? You've been working, you worked in Number 10, you've worked in the senior figure in the Foreign Office, been our most senior diplomat in Washington. Is there a battle going on at the heart of this government in terms of the level of support for Israel? Because we've had David Cameron, I think, being very critical publicly of Israel in a way that, say, the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden wasn't on Sunday morning. It was in the wake of these aid workers being killed tragically in this attack by the IDF. And then David Cameron yesterday, speaking in Washington, said that the UK will not suspend arms exports to Israel. That's something that's been demanded. Won't publish that legal advice, but says the legal advice has not changed. Is there a battle going on for how much support Israel is getting?
Yeah, I think there's been a debate going on across the road between Downing Street and between the Foreign Office, amongst ministers. I'm sure the Ministry of Defence has been involved as well. I think what David Cameron said yesterday kind of suggests to me that this debate has been settled, at least for the time being, and we're not going to stop the very limited amount of arms and mostly it's spare parts, that we send to Israel. You can't rule out it reopening if something terrible like the killing of those aid workers happens again. But for the time being, I think it is settled. And if David Cameron didn't agree with it, he wouldn't have said what he said yesterday. So we are where we are now.
Indeed. Well, we shall see. It's very much a moving story, as always, as it has been for over 6 months now. Kim Darroch, very much appreciate you joining us. Lord Darroch there, of course.